Like most school teachers, our Miss Brooks, who teaches English at Madison High School, has been exposed to her share of puppy love.
I'll say I have. It's getting so I can't look a puppy in the face without flinching. But the kids at school are nothing compared to the case I discovered at home between my landlady, Mrs. Davis, and Horace Barlow, the school's new basement custodian. Although she met him a week ago at a school tea, up until Thursday morning at breakfast, she kept denying anything but a passing interest in him.
Please, Connie, just because Horace Barlow hasn't been over a few times is no reason for people to jump to conclusions. My goodness, Horace isn't jumping to conclusions.
At his age, Horace is lucky if he could limp to conclusions. But I've seen you two together, Mrs. Davis.
As far as I'm concerned, I think of Horace as a real nice boy.
And he is. He's a really nice 68-year-old boy.
He happens to only be 54, Connie. He told me so himself.
I know, Mrs. Davis, and Jack Benny is 39. Not that I'm criticizing your friendship. Far from it. I'm delighted that Horace is so genuinely fond of you.
Oh, Connie, Horace doesn't even know I'm alive.
Don't let that get you down. It's hard to tell with him most of the time, either.
Anyway, I'm simply not interested in anything but the most casual relationship. Heavens, if I were thinking seriously, I'd try to find out something about the man, wouldn't I?
You haven't yet?
Definitely not. I'm not even mildly curious. I haven't even the slightest idea where he keeps his $10,000 life insurance policy. And I have no knowledge whatsoever of how he got his leg wounded in the Mexican War, for which he gets a $53 a month pension. I don't even know in what bank he keeps his $2,619 savings account.
Shame on you. You haven't even got his social security number yet.
102592.
There's Walter Denton now. He's driving me to school. Now, is there anything you want me to say to Mr. Barlow for you if I happen to see him at school?
Not a thing.
Okay.
It'd be unnecessary to even mention to him that I'm not busy tonight.
I see.
And there's no need for any remarks about the cake I'm baking today being too big for one person to finish alone.
I'll be silent as a tomb.
And above all, it would be utterly shameless if he were to hear that I don't want to waste the box of cigars I bought yesterday.
You can trust me implicitly, Mrs. Davis. I won't say a word to Mr. Barlow. I'll just hit him on the head and drag him home. I'm glad you picked me up a little early this morning, Walter. I've got an errand to run for Mrs. Davis before first class.
Oh, I'll get you where you need to be with the speed of a gazelle, Miss Brooks. Oh, by the way, how's Mrs. Davis's romance with Mr. Barlow coming along?
Oh, have you noticed that too? I think it's the cutest thing in the world. Mrs. Davis actually has a bad case of puppy love.
Well, it is cute considering she's in her second puppyhood. No disrespect intended, of course. After all, what can be more romantic than two lonely old people encountering the grand passions when at the yellow leaf of life?
Why, that's actually poetic, Walter.
The burning desires of youth long past. They look now for the subdued glow of companionship, the warm and simple pleasures that two elderly people in love can share together.
I can see it now, playing footsie in the same pan of Epsom salt.
I bet you'd like to find romance at that age too, huh, Miss Brooks?
At the rate I'm going now, I'm counting on it. But Walter, I'd just as soon you don't mention the subject at school. It might be a source of embarrassment to Mr. Barlow.
My trap is sealed, Miss Brooks. Now, what's the errand you're going to do for Mrs. Davis this morning?
Well, off the record, I'm going to invite Mr. Barlow over to the house tonight. He's been a little backward about asking for a date.
I get it. You're like Mrs. Davis's John Alden from that poem.
It's good to see that you read what I assign.
Now all you've got to do is get Mr. Barlow to invite Mr. Boynton over, and you're all set.
Meeting's adjourned.
Hi, Miss Brooks.
You're pretty early today, aren't you? Hello, Harriet. I've got to deliver a message to the custodian. Have you seen him?
Oh, yes. Mr. Barlow just went into his office. Isn't it just wonderful, Miss Brooks?
I don't know. I've never been in his office.
I mean, about Mr. Barlow and Mrs. Davis. They're crazy about each other. Of course, it's a big secret.
It couldn't be a bigger secret if they took out an ad in the paper.
To think of two people finding love at a time of life when others are preparing to pass on. Two people walking hand in hand in the twilight of life.
Yes, I'm sure there's nothing like a brisk walk before passing on.
Well, I won't keep you any longer. Far be it from me to delay Mrs. Davis's emissary of love.
Good luck in your mission, John Alden. Thank you, Priscilla.
Come in.
I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mr. Barlow, but there's something I wanted to ask you.
Well, go ahead and ask. You want to get apples, you got to shake the tree. What is it?
It's just this. I was wondering if tonight, that is, if you haven't any other plans, Mrs. Davis isn't doing anything, and I'm sure she'd be pleased if you wanted to drop over.
Well, that's right neighborly of you. Would you like me to drop over?
Of course. I'm sure you and Mrs. Davis will have a lovely evening together.
Are you planning on staying in Miss Brooks?
I suppose so, Mr. Barlow, but I'm sure that at your age you don't need a chaperone.
You're right about that. Maybe we could send Mrs. Davis to a movie.
Send Mrs. Davis to a movie?
Well, sure. Oh, there's no sense in me trying to hide it any longer. Why, the only reason I've been coming around Mrs. Davis's place is to be near you.
Near me? But you've been making dates with Mrs. Davis.
Well, naturally. You gotta slip the drone's little honey if you want to get next to the queen bee.
You, Mr. Barlow, are barking up the wrong hive. This is ridiculous. I simply can't believe it's even happening.
I couldn't believe it myself. I just couldn't understand the feelings that swept over me when I first saw you, Miss Brooks. Since that time, I've had my glasses changed twice, but it's still the same. I keep asking myself, doll, where have you been all my life?
For 3/4 of it, I wasn't even born. Look, Mr. Barlow, there's a great difference in our ages.
Oh, nonsense, Miss Brooks. I just don't believe in age.
Well, neither do I. I've been standing it off for years. I mean, if you'll think this over for a while, you'll realize that it just couldn't work out.
Oh, why not? Is there somebody else playing the piano in your front parlor?
No, but Mr. Boynton plays the ukulele on my back porch. We've been going together for quite a while now.
You mean that biology fella? Oh, shucks, he's just an unsophisticated kid. Why, you couldn't warm him up if you stuck a Bunsen burner under him.
You've been peeking back there, huh? That is, Mr. Boynton's just shy about expressing his feelings.
He ain't got no feelings if you ask me. Leastwise, not like I have, especially since I met you. Why, I just knew today was going to bring some excitement into my life. I got the strangest sensation right after breakfast.
Maybe something fell into your gruel?
There's no two ways about it, Missy. I'm smitten.
Well, would it unsmite you if I told you that I'm engaged to Mr. Boynton?
Engaged? But he wasn't even at your place the night I visited Mrs. Davis.
He must have been working. If you come over tonight, I'm sure he'll be there.
Well, seeing is believing. I'll drop by, Miss Brooks, but I still say, when it comes to you bringing me messages from Mrs. Davis, speak for yourself.
There's no use speaking for myself, since you aren't going to hear me.
While our Miss Brooks recovers from that confession of love, leave us take a moment to talk about today's sponsor. Today, we have no sponsor, but instead of being self-aggrandizing with our Patreon, we here at Retrostatic Radio would like to thank all teachers all over the globe. Without the dedication of earnest educators and the perseverance of our public school system, even something as simple as this series could not have begun. So thank you, teachers of America and around the globe. Now back to our Miss Brooks and a bad case of puppy love.
Well, I was quite chagrined to find out that Horace Barlow was more interested in me than he was in Mrs. Davis. This was one triangle I was determined would not be eternal, not even overnight. Therefore, at lunchtime, I headed for Mr. Boynton's table in the cafeteria. But just as I got halfway to it... Oh, Mr. Conklin, I'm terribly sorry, sir.
You're slipping, Miss Brooks. You only knocked 2 dishes off of my tray today.
I guess I didn't see where I was going.
Obviously. When you do, you get the whole tray.
Luckily, nothing happened to your apple pie. The plate is broken, but see, the pie is intact.
Thank you. Even more luckily, it would appear that it seemed to have missed all of my clothing.
No, sir, I've never seen you looking so neat. White carnation and all.
I'm not wearing a... Well, I spoke too soon. That's vanilla ice cream.
I'm so sorry, sir. It never would have happened, but I'm just terribly preoccupied today.
It must be a day for preoccupation. I've had nothing but trouble from our new school custodian for the same reason.
You mean Mr. Barlow?
Yes. He's forgotten about the furnace. He's forgotten to fix the pipes. The old goat acts as if he was in love.
Maybe he is.
Who could that 70-year-old codger be in love with? His mop?
He happens to be 54.
Yes, and Jack Benny is 39. Horace Barlow, in love. Ha! At his age, he probably couldn't tell the difference between a woman and a kangaroo.
Probably not. Well, if you'll excuse me, I'll be hopping off to lunch. No doubt I'll run into you later in the day, Mr. Conklin.
It is with that thought in mind that I carry every possible form of accident and hospitalization insurance. Good day, Miss Brooks.
He's got a lot of nerve. Just because a person's lived a few more years than some other person.
I don't like to interrupt, Miss Brooks, but if you keep talking to yourself, you're liable to make an eavesdropper out of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Walter. I've had a little shock this morning. You see, I spoke to Horace Barlow a short time ago about making a date with Mrs. Davis.
Oh, what'd he say?
He said that, well, he's not interested in Mrs. Davis. He's smitten with someone else.
Someone else? But he can't do that to Mrs. Davis. She's a very sensitive little lady, and she's nuts about him. She'll be terribly hurt.
That's what I'm afraid of.
He doesn't know when he's well off. I'd like to see the hunk of crowbait he's fallen for.
Now just wait a minute, Walter. It so happens that Mr. Barlow thinks he's in love with me.
With you? But that's illegal. That's unthinkable. It's,
Let's just call it unusual. I'm actually extremely worried about the situation. Mrs. Davis and I have been friends for too long to let a thing like this come between us.
Well, why don't you just tell Mr. Barlow to go peddle his papers?
I did, practically. I even told him I was engaged to Mr. Boynton. That's what I'm worried about. They're both coming over tonight, and I've got to prove it.
What's so tough about that? I'm sure Mr. Boynton will cooperate.
You are?
Sure. Well, at least for one night.
So you don't think he'd be willing to move in?
And you do gotta get Mrs. Davis out of the house tonight. 'Cause if she caught you and Mr. Boynton acting as if you were engaged, she'd know something was rotten in Denmark.
What a sweet way to put it. But Walter, how do I get Mrs. Davis out of the house?
Oh, that's easy. There's an old bachelor friend staying at the house for a couple of days. A Mr. Gordon. I'm sure he'd like a date with a nice clean-cut character like Mrs. Davis. I'll ask her to go out with him as a favor to my folks.
What about Mr. Barlow? She expects him tonight.
Just tell her he couldn't make it. Say his blood pressure hit a new high or something. Now you go talk to Mr. Boynton, and I'll call home and make sure Mr. Gordon's available to act as Davis bait for the evening. See you later, Miss Brooks.
All right, Walter. Thank you for your help. Me and the night and the music. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. Oh, Mr. Boynton, there you are. I've got to talk to you right away.
Oh, what's lit a fire under you, Miss Brooks?
It's about Mrs. Davis. You know, she's got a crush on the school custodian, Mr. Barlow. But unfortunately, he's head over heels in love with somebody else.
Don't make me laugh while I'm drinking my coffee. Mr. Barlow's an old man. What kind of a shriveled-up prune could he have fallen for?
Why does it have to be a prune? For all you know, Mr. Barlow could be crazy about a nice, young, firm, fuzzy peach. Besides, he's only 48.
Yeah, and Jack Benny.
Is 39. Yeah, that gag's as old as Horace by now.
And not what you'd call in prime condition. Why, his hyperthyroidism is apparent, and his incipient arteriosclerosis masking cardiac decompensation was evident to me after one glance.
Bet you can't say that again for $1. The truth is, Mr. Boynton, Mr. Barlow has been coming to our place just to be near me. If I'd known you'd get so excited about this, I'd have worn my raincoat. Please hand me that napkin.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Brooks, but I couldn't help exploding. You mean to tell me Mr. Barlow is in love with you?
That's right. We hyperthyroids have to stick together. Look, Mr. Boynton, I know it's an absurd situation, but my only real concern is Mrs. Davis. I've got to discourage Mr. Barlow once and for all, and you've got to help me.
Me? What can I do?
Well, he's coming over to our place tonight. I invited him on behalf of Mrs. Davis. That's when he told me how he felt about me, and that's when I told him something utterly fantastic.
What'd you tell him?
That you... Hold on, hand me that napkin again. That you and I were to be married.
Engaged to be married? Miss Brooks, that's utterly fantastic.
I'm glad I had the napkin for that second tsunami. Now, Mr. Boynton, this is very important to someone who's very important to me. Mrs. Davis is just about the best friend I've got.
Well, if that's the case, Miss Brooks, I guess the least I can do is cooperate.
Will you really, Mr. Boynton?
Sure, it's not like I have to move in.
Oh.
Oh boy, I'm full. That was a fine dinner, Miss Brooks.
I'm glad you liked it, Mr. Boynton. I opened it all by myself. I hope Mr. Gordon took Mrs. Davis to a nice place for dinner. He appears to be a jolly old fellow, doesn't he?
Yes, indeed. I noticed he gave you a pretty thorough once-over when you were introduced. You seem to pack quite a wallop for these elderly Joes.
That's me, the Cleopatra of cardiac cases. But I've got to clear away these dishes. Mr. Barlow will be over any minute.
Well, if that's the case, shouldn't we be getting into the mood?
Excuse me? The mood?
Well, yes. We're supposed to be engaged, aren't we?
Oh, that mood? Why, Mr. Boynton, I can hardly believe my ears.
There's no sense in making a chore out of this thing. We might as well have some fun doing it.
Fun doing it?
Why, certainly. Now let's get started.
Get started?
Of course, the quicker the better.
How quick are we talking here?
Let me just roll up my sleeves and come on.
Right here in the kitchen? I mean...
Well, of course. You wash and I'll dry.
So much for the hopes of Connie Brooks, girl dreamer. Mr. Boynton, working in the kitchen is how married people would get into the mood. Engaged couples do their work in the parlor, with soft lights.
Oh, okay then. Do you have a big enough basin for us to do these in the parlor?
Sometimes I wish you were ugly. Come with me, Mr. Boynton. I'll attend the dishes later. Let us retire to the living room.
Well, all right, Miss Brooks. It isn't too healthy to commence working too soon after a good meal anyways.
That must be Mr. Barlow. Just make yourself comfortable. I'll let him in.
Well, here I am, Brooksy. Fit as a fiddle and twice as musical.
I hope not. Come in, Mr. Barlow. I fixed a little dinner this evening for my fiancé. We were just relaxing before doing the dishes. Right this way, Mr. Barlow.
Your fiancé? Then you mean... Well, I'll be doggone.
Hello, darling. Did you miss me?
Miss you?
I hated to leave you alone for so many seconds, but I just had to let Mr. Barlow in. You remember Mr. Barlow, don't you, dear?
Oh, of course I do. How are you, Mr. Barlow? Snappy as a cookie and twice as full of ginger. But let's get to the point. Miss Brooks here told me that you two are engaged. Is that true? Why, yes it is. Then how come no one around school knows about it?
Because we wanted it that way. We've been secretly engaged for over 6 months now, haven't we, darling?
We certainly have, Miss Brooks. Miss Brooks? Why does he call you Miss Brooks if you're gonna be married?
He doesn't like any display of affection in front of company. Let's sit down, shall we? Mr. Barlow, draw up a chair, won't you? And sweetheart, you drop a chair, and we'll sit down.
We? Miss Brooks, I worked out with the basketball team at the school today, and, well, my knees are a little weak for you to be sitting on.
It may be a foul, but I'll never get a shot like this again. Sit down, dear. Here we are. Comfy?
Yeah. Seems mighty strange to me. Most engaged folks I've seen act a little more demonstrative than you two do.
But we're just mad for each other, aren't we, darling?
I'd definitely say mad.
You know, sweetie, you haven't kissed me in 5 minutes.
What?
I said you haven't kissed me in about 5 minutes. What are we going to do about that?
Let's wait another 5 minutes.
What's the matter, dear? You want to kiss me, right?
Maybe it's me.
No, I'm positive he doesn't want to kiss you. Oh, you mean he doesn't want to kiss me in your presence? I'm sure that wouldn't stop my great big handsome lover boy, would it, dearest?
Why, certainly not. Give me your cheek.
Wow. How about another one to get me down from the ceiling?
Maybe I ought to go.
But Mr. Barlow, you just got here.
I know, but won't I be interrupting something?
Only if you go. I mean, stick around a little while longer. Who on earth? I'll go see who it is. Don't move, either of you.
Sorry to bother you, Connie, but I forgot my key again. Mrs. Davis, what are you doing home so early? Let me help you off with your coat and eyeglasses. Mr. Gordon showed me the most wonderful time, Connie, but he has a business appointment first thing in the morning, so we had to cut our date a bit short. Oh, who's that in the living room? That's Mr. Boynton. Oh, I see. And who's the man in the other chair? That's Mr. Boynton, too. He's very restless tonight. Oh, pish-posh. I see who it is now. That's Mr. Barlow. But you said he wasn't coming over tonight.
He must have changed his mind. Listen, Mrs. Davis, when two people have a beautiful friendship, they've got to do everything in their power to keep it from breaking up, right?
Let's talk later, dear. I've got to get these shoes off at once. Mr. Gordon just danced my tootsies into a stupor. He's a wonderful man, Connie. That's why I want you to do me a little favor.
A favor?
Yes. When you go into the living room again,
yes,
brush off that old coat, will ya?
You mean,
yes, I haven't the heart to hurt Mr. Barlow's feelings.
It'll save a lot of explanations, I guess. But I know I'm going to get 2 birds with 1 stone.
What do you mean, Connie?
As soon as the old duck is gone, my little lovebird will take off like a wounded pelican. I'm sorry about tonight, Mr. Barlow. You take care now.
I'm sorry Mrs. Davis doesn't feel well. Is she lying down in her room?
Yes, she is, Mr. Boynton.
Well, then, that just leaves you and me, doesn't it?
Yes, but don't be nervous. It's much too early for you to think of leaving.
Oh, I'm not thinking of leaving, Miss Brooks. You and I still have plenty of unfinished business to attend to.
Unfinished business, huh?
Certainly.
Between you and I?
After all, somebody's got to do those dinner dishes. You wash and I'll dry.
Better still, you wash and dry. I've got a more lucrative engagement.
An engagement?
Sure. If I hurry, I may catch Mr. Barlow before he gets on the bus.
The school day is over and our Miss Brooks comes to a close for the evening, and it starred Megan Klodnicki in the titular role. Next week, we enter the cold reality of space, with Zach Cassidy taking lead in Cold Equations. To become a producer or sponsor for the broadcast of Retrostatic Radio, please become a patron at patreon.com. That includes such tiers as our very own special behind-the-scenes podcast, live hangouts on Discord, and even, if you so choose, picking an episode for next season.
Sharing is caring, so please subscribe, follow, and share us around. We're also available on every major social media outlet. This concludes our broadcast day.